So far, we've been spending a lot of time talking about how to describe a single variable, both numerically and visually. At the end of chapter 4, we turn our attention to what if we have multiple variables, and specifically two variables, and we want to talk about the relationship between them, or describe the connection or lack of connection between the two. And so we're introduced to two concepts, and this idea of relationships between variables we're going to build upon that later on in the semester. So the two methods we're introduced to are scatter plots and contingency tables. Now, scatter plots are not going to be new to you in any sense of the word. You've seen these throughout your math classes. And it's the process of plotting the data on a grid or a graph, and so all the way back to your graph paper days. This is what we're talking about. So we're not going to spend a lot of time on that here, but when we have data, and I've tossed up some data on some employees we have. This is fictional data, but we know what building they work in. If they're full-time or half-time or contract workers, how many years they've been with us, and then the compensation that they receive. So just some data to play around with, and we would quite quickly be able to plot. So with a scatter plot, what we need is quantitative data, right, or a numerical variable where we can plot it on an axis from 0 to however high we need to be. We need the axis to be able to contain all of our data. And I do say from 0, and there's very few times when we want to see the axis not start at 0. And the reason for that is we don't want to try to trick or mislead, or whether on purpose or accidentally, the reader, and so we want to default to an axis that touches 0, and go from there. Yeah. So I'm just gonna, in Excel here, I've plotted, or I've had Excel do it for me, just the simple scatter plot of years and compensation. So a couple other things. Typically, it's pretty standard. If in any case, if you have a dollar amount, for it to go on the y-axis. But in general, you can flip around the axes. But yeah, if you do have a dollar amount, it's typical to go on the y-axis. And so we see that relationship here, or this is a way to display a potential relationship. Actually, in this case, it doesn't seem to have a strong relationship between amongst our 29 observations. But yeah, it's simple as that, and we'll walk through plotting some of those in lecture. What I want to turn our attention to, though, is the idea of a contingency table, or what is sometimes called or in Excel they call it a pivot table, and you'll hear other names, multiple frequency table or something like that. But when we had two quantitative variables, it was quite clear that we could just go ahead and plot those, but there is no way to plot something like building or status time on a graph like that. And so what we turn to instead is, much like we did with a single variable, what did we do? We turned to a frequency table. Here we're doing a contingency table, but a contingency table is really just two frequency tables smushed together. And we use these when we have at least one of our variables as qualitative. Okay, we can do it with quantitative variables, right? And what did we do to make frequency distributions? We had to decide on bins. So we could do a similar thing. If we wanted to include years here, we could, bin them up from 0 to 5, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20, something like that. But let's just walk through a little bit. If we wanted to make a contingency table of building and status. So I said it's basically two frequency tables pushed together. So let's start with, I'm going to find where I am on the screen here. Okay. So a frequency table of building, let's just building. Okay, and the way we would do that is list the, just going to swap that out and do, let's do main. So we have three types of buildings here, or three buildings: main, north, and west. And so in a frequency table, what we would do is we would look up and we would start counting. Okay, main. So how many mains do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And you know, in Excel, you might want to sort the data, or you could use the count ifs method. What did I just say? 9. So we would have a count of 9. Okay, and I'm leaving a little space because we're going to fill this in. But whoop, that's up in building. So let's put that down next to main. We could do the similar thing, count up north, and I think we get to 11. You can pause and verify if you'd like, and then I think we get 9 for west. And so here we have a frequency table. Now I've left space, and one last thing, oftentimes we put a little total there, make sure we have all of our values accounted for. And so what are we going to do with this leftover space here? Well, we're actually going to put in the other variable that we're interested in. Okay, and in that case, let's look at status. I have not left myself enough space. I thought there were only 2. Let me try to drag this over. Okay. And so we have 3 statuses. We have contract, that is supposed to say contract or abbreviation. Contract, we'll just abbreviate it. We have full, and we have halftime. Okay, and so we build a similar frequency table, except this time we're going to put the totals down here on the bottom. So if we look through and we see contract and we say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Might have missed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Okay, so we have 9. If we do the same thing with full, I believe we've come up with 15. And then lastly, halftime is 5. So we have a complete frequency table with just kind of in the middle here. Again, that total is going to be 29. Right? So this 29 is going to be both the total of the bottom row and the far right column. So we have the outer workings of a contingency table, and it's comprised of 2 frequency tables. Again, if we had instead tried to do this with years, we could break it into bins and have a frequency distribution embedded in here too. So what are we going to do with this center information, or this center hole here? We have 9 cells that we can fill in. Right? There's a spot here where if we're reading this as a table, that intersects at main and contract. Okay, and so this spot is going to be for individuals who are both a main and a contract. So this is a contract, but it's not main, so it does not get counted. So we can keep scrolling down. Here is main and contract. So that's 1. Here's another one. Here's a third. 4, 5, 6. So I count up 6. Okay, and so that goes in here. Similarly, we can count up main and full. Okay, and I think there's just the one. And then lastly, if we count up halftime and main, here's one, and here's a second, and that is it. And now this comprises all of, or includes all of the people that work in the main building. Some of them are contract, some are full-time, and some are half-time. But the total of those three had better equal 9, right? Because we know there are 9 people working in the main building. And so 6 plus 1 plus 3 is equal to 9. Right? So we can sum across each of these rows, and it will equal the total on the side. Do the same thing with north, and you can pause and verify these, but this is 1, 8, and 2 as my counting goes. And again, that sums across. Lastly, we have people working in the west building. And so there are some contracts, right? Again, here are 2 right here. I think those are the only 2. So we have 2, and does this make sense now? We knew there were 9 contract workers. We already knew 6 worked in the main, 1 worked in the north building. So it better be true that 2 work in the west, and in fact, that's true. So they sum down as well. Okay, and so we can already kind of guess that this should be 6, but we would again probably want to verify that. And then lastly 1, and so we can see it sums in both directions. Okay, and so what we have here is a complete contingency table, or again, you'll see it listed in Excel as a pivot table. We would want to probably write out, something like status here. Right, so there's some ways we can kind of clean it up and make it more clear. But this is the heart of the contingency table, and it includes a lot of information here, right? So we have the normal frequency tables, but we also have a way to kind of look in and see, is there some relationship between your status and what building you work in? Okay, and you can start to ask questions. Now, we're not testing anything statistically here. And eventually we can talk about how we would go about doing that. But here we're just kind of, noticing a pattern or being able to get a sense as to whether some of these go together. And so maybe you might say, oh, it looks like, we have a lot of people we have 9 people working in the main building, but they're mostly contract workers, which is different than the north and the west buildings. Those tend to be more full-time staff. And so you can start to, grab a lot more information in this type of a display than just staring at this wall of data again. Okay, so that's an introduction to the pivot table or contingency table, and we'll see on in lecture how to do this in Excel, and it really is a pretty slick, quick way to do it in Excel, and it's used quite heavily, especially in a business setting. People turn to pivot tables as a very quick and easy way to summarize data. So.